Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to welcome you to this conversation, which is premised on LGBTQ plus activism, marginalization of gender and sexuality. Lawctopus and Academike, which is Lawctopus Law Journal, are together organizing this series of webinars on law and gender. And we say law and gender very loosely, which in the sense that we don't have as much representation as of now, but we hope to have more and more representation with the number of webinars that we have. The first talk in the series is talking LGBTQIA plus activism in law. We have a wonderful panel comprising activist and lawyer Vivek Divan, advocate Amritananda Chakravorty, and program manager at Nazariya and activist also in some sense, Jitender and Bhardwaj, and a very dear friend. So before like I go on to sort of introduce them, I would like to tell you something that I read after I spoke to Vivek. So we had this conversation, a couple of conversations before having this webinar, and I think I sort of really annoyed him into it. So I read this article that he wrote in November 2018 when the Supreme Court decriminalized Section 377. He wrote about the 2 decades of activism that led to the movement of decriminalization. In an article that was in the Wire, I can share, like while they're talking, I'll share the links with you in the chat box. And he began the piece, like the piece as a whole was a marvel, but also like he began the piece by saying, and I quote, scores of ordinary yet extraordinary, diverse, committed, and courageous queer people and allies worked tenaciously away from the limelight to ensure our freedom today. A more detailed truth telling will happen in the future when wholehearted homage will be paid to many champions. For now, on Pride, there is this tribute. I mean, I think this sums up. Probably this conversation is also a little like a minute point of that homage being adding to that homage and moment of activism. I'm, I hope that people who work silently get their limelight because they deserve it. And so let me go on to introduce them. Uh, Please don't like this introduction is like very formal and please don't go by it. They have done a lot of work. So activist and lawyer Vivek Divan has been working on the intersections of law, health, queerness and sexuality for more than 2 decades now. And he has written and worked on HIV, TB, LGBTQIA plus concerns and led global level policy initiatives. He played a critical role in community mobilization, which led to the NARS Foundation India Trust case, and he's currently heading the Center for Health, Equity, Law and Policy, a national level nonprofit legal aid and advocacy organization. We have advocate Amritananda Chakravorty. She's a Delhi-based advocate. She specializes in litigation on gender and sexuality and has been providing pro bono services to trans women and others from the LGBTQA community. And she was also actively involved in the landmark case of decriminalization of Section 377 IPC. She was earlier associated with Lawyers Collective, if I'm not wrong. And at present, she runs Chakravorty, Samsung, and Munot along with other partners. And I relate with her on a spiritual level because her Twitter bio says lazy AF. And I think that is where our souls connect.
You're not supposed to say that.
And Jitender is a very dear friend, and he's also a researcher and is also an activist in becoming, and in some sense, also an activist as is. Jitender associates as a non binary person. They are presently working with Nazariya, a queer feminist resource group based out of Delhi, as a program manager. They have previously worked with organizations like All India Women's Conference, Beyond I, the YP Foundation, Hidden Pockets on variety of issues like climate change and gender, sexual and reproductive health and rights, etc. Through their work, they have been advocating for equal and equitable spaces for queer and trans persons in every aspect of social life. Thank you all for coming after that and thank you for all the guests for joining us. And thank you for all the people who are, being part of this movement. I'm really happy to do this and probably share I don't know what this adds, if this adds up to anything, but I hope it does. Um, we should like begin with the questions, I think, if that's fine. Yeah. Okay, so before, I mean, beginning this talk, I was looking through a lot in TED Talks that Vivek has done, and like a some amount of interviews that he has also done. You have said that the 2018 judgment was a culmination of years of activism that led to that one moment of decriminalization. And so perhaps the judgment is also made of many acts of activism. My question is twofold. First, it is to you. Uh, it would be great if you could throw some light on the history of activism, which eventually became the movement. And then it is to advocate Amritananda or Amrita, if that's fine, if I can call you that. So you interact with the court and the LGBTQ persons on like an everyday basis, and you must have many stories where also you talk about, if you could like talk about this experience, and you could explain how the community as is, and I will come to the part of the community later. But as persons also, how do LGBTQ persons navigate the law and the state? So the first part of the question is dedicated to Vivek. Uh, and yeah.
Right. Thanks a lot, Sonali, for organizing this and having me uh, be able to share some of this. I think it's important. You said you're not sure what it will amount to or whether it will contribute, but I think every one of these things does. At the end, in totality, I think the more we document accurately the way we've, uh, you know, conducted ourselves, I think there's a lot to be shared with future activism and future activists and those in the queer community, and the community is only going to grow. So I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of how we did what we did. And I think so. There's a couple of reasons. I think before I answer you, and of course I'll do it in a summary way because there's such a long journey. But I think there's a couple of reasons which I was thinking about, why is it important that we do this? And I think, like I said, it's important for future generations to also understand. But also, I think if the audience is going to be future lawyers, I think there's something to be said about how you lawyer, how you lawyer for a community and not just for yourself. How you actually represent a larger uh, kind of community of people. And because the opportunity in the courtroom is an opportunity mostly for the elite, who gets to the court and who's able to get a chance to be heard is a very, very small sliver of people, for various reasons, including expenses, including the intimidatory nature of law itself, including just the inaccessibility for various other reasons. And so I think there's a lot to be said about how does one lawyer in context like this, and also how does one represent a community you're a part of, uh, in a way which is really trying to speak to the wider experience and not solely your experience. So there's a value in that. There's also a value, according to me, obviously, and I don't think this needs to be said, but maybe it does these days, about speaking the truth. What is the actual truth of this story? I have not, in all the litigation I've done, I don't believe that I've come across a narrative of a case which has been so misrepresented. It's extraordinary to me how the story has been told as a victory of a few by a few, whereas actually it's just the furthest thing from the truth. So I think there's a value in, of course, doing that too. And finally, I think there is a value in all of this in telling us maybe about how we can do activism in the future. I didn't come of age in this world of social media, so it's a very different way in which people actually communicate and come together. Uh, so I cannot speak for that, but I can speak for the ways in which, without social media, we were able to reach out to each other across the nation, a large nation, a complex nation, a highly diverse nation, and try our very, very best to be representative. And again, just to say at the outset that this was hardly a perfect process, but there was an attempt. There was this really genuine attempt to be representative. There's been critiques of this also, of how it was not necessarily entirely representative, and there's some validity to that. But I think there is a lot to be said about how you can at least make that attempt. And I think that's a very vital thing to do when you're representing a community which is diverse, etc. So just to, so for me, a lot of this is, a lot of talking about this and sharing is about that. Because there's a lot of kind of vital lessons to be learned, I suppose. Um, so just to throw light a little bit on the activism itself that went in, I don't know how many people really know, but first challenge to 377 was in 1996 by a group called the AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan, who had actually published what I think is the greatest piece of writing on being queer in India even today, which was called Less Than Gay, which was published in 1994-95. Which was a real kind of, this is the reality of queer India as one was able to document it at that point. I think AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan found that actually condoms were not being distributed in Tihar jail amongst inmates who were having sex with each other at a time when HIV was a real fear, and they realized 377 was a problem coming in the way of that, and that's when they filed their case in 96. So I got involved in queer activism as such maybe a couple of years later, and then I think the idea one didn't know what had happened to the ABVA case. Actually, one had no idea. One had not heard very much about it since then. And then, of course, HIV was now visibly impacting the community. And people, we are talking about a time when it's interesting to talk about this at COVID time, because it was sort of a COVID for the queer community, as it was for many others in India. It was a different way of transmission and all of that. So there are some very, very big differences there. But the fact is that there was an invisible manner in which people were suffering. And largely, HIV, as in all disease, impacts the most marginalized in the most impactfully horrendous ways. And so you saw this happening in queer people who were not particularly empowered or at the margins of society. And queer people generally were at the margins of society anyway, whether you were whatever class you belong to. And there were NGOs working in those contexts, and Nas Foundation in Delhi was one of them. And they said this is just impossible. This work is impossible to do to critically save lives, because HIV was spreading and the cops were coming in the way of us being able to do the work of distributing condoms and educating communities, etc. Because 377 loomed large. So that's really the origin of where we filed our petition in 2001 eventually. And also remember this, that in 1997 was a time when there were theaters burnt down in Bombay because a movie called Fire was released, which represented lesbian love. And so this was all happening. If you look back at it, it was all very juxtaposed close to each other. So these were moments, and we filed this case. And I don't want to go into detail because it's almost impossible to cover everything in such a short time. But we were expecting some backlash potentially some backlash from the child rights community, because 377 was used always also to protect child sexual abuse. It was the only law. And so we actually spoken to child rights groups about this, and told them that, listen, we're not asking for the entire section to be removed, but a reading down of the section to exclude consensual sex between adults. And of course, we expected opposition from the government. That was to be expected, not surprising at all. What we did not expect was opposition from within the queer community about how we went about filing the case. And I've written about this. I think that's something I think I've shared with you. You could share with participants if you feel like. But it's a pretty detailed account of, I don't want to get into all of that. But I'll jump straight away to then the activism which that critique generated. Because that critique made us reflect on how we were lawyering. We were a group of lawyers at Lawyers Collective who were actually litigating for people living with HIV, sex workers, hugely marginalized communities, and queer people, trans people, etc., hijras, etc. And we realized that, of course, we were representing NAS, which also works with these communities. But the fact is that actually one of the things we had not done was probably talk to a larger, this was one critique that we received, that we hadn't talked to the larger activist space, the queer space, which I don't think is entirely accurate, but be that as it may. what we did then, and this began in 2002 end really, because it took 2 years for the government of India to file its affidavit opposing the case. And that's when there was a real sense of like, oh my gosh, we are in trouble here. And so that generated this extraordinary process of consultancy and consultation rather with the entire queer community as it was then, who were activists in the country. And this meant, frankly, me going to various cities and talking to, queer collectives. I remember a meeting in Calcutta in 2004 or 5 where people paid for themselves to come from the different districts because, a lot of the work in HIV was supporting a lot of the queer activism at those days, because it was often queer men who were affected by HIV, or queer identified people who were affected by HIV, who actually was setting up these CDOs and other NGOs and stuff, local networks. And so we had about 40, 50 people in Calcutta over a day just to explain to them what this case was about, why it was important for us to actually fight this, challenge this section, but also to ask them, what do you feel about it? And do you think there's a way you can contribute? And are there stories that you can tell, which we can then take to the courtroom and reflect, etc.? So meetings like that in Calcutta, Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, a lot of it, of course, in cities largely. But what we did, what those meetings brought about was, sometimes 70, 80 people from across the country coming to meet each other, trans, lesbian, multiple identities. In those days, we didn't have the sort of language we had today around sexuality and identity and stuff. But, people of various queer kind of identities attending, multilingual, geographically widely spread. And what were we discussing in those meetings? We were discussing these very things, talking about what this case meant, talking about what is a PIL, what's a writ petition, what's your fundamental rights, what is being violated, what are court procedures, and doing this and really demystifying the law. And in that process, an extraordinary thing happened, which was, an empowerment which just took place because we were having these discussions. You could tell that there was a moment in 2005, which I've written about also in January in Bombay at a large meeting, where suddenly you saw some activists say that, hey, no, we're not turning back this clock. If the court has thrown us out on some issue of locus standi or a technical issue, then let's just fight this out and go ahead and go to the Supreme Court. And we said, okay, let this be something the community decides. And so in that room, and let me tell you also that, the people in that room were 80, 90 maybe, but they were representative of hundreds of others who they worked with in their communities. So what we were trying to do was, have these discussions at a local level and then bring them all into to kind of really think through what the pros, cons, what the risks and benefits of some of the challenges we were facing throughout this journey were in the courtroom. 3 or 4 things happened. I've already talked to you about how people began to get educated about the law. I told you also about the sense of empowerment. Also, the fact is that, a lot of this work happens in isolation. We work in our little NGOs or in our little communities in sometimes very remote places, and there's a real sense of isolation. There's a sense that you're doing this all alone. But these kinds of forums, and again, I can't say that this happened consciously, but unconsciously and subconsciously, it created a sense of solidarity and collectivism, which just didn't exist. In a typical litigation, as lawyer audiences here would know, you file a case, you have a lawyer, you go to the courtroom, and you have your case heard, and it is decided one way or the other. There's really no impact necessarily. Often cases are because it's impacting you, but especially in public interest cases where you're impacting a larger audience, it's really vital for those voices to then come into the courtroom. And that courtroom is elite, as I've already mentioned. So it's really difficult to break those doors. And so what these processes did was also to begin to push at those doors and open them up. One of the other things I'll say, which is, and there's a lot to be said, so you can also tell me when to wind down. But one of the other things which came out of this process was an understanding that, we were thrown out on locus standi, which is the court saying basically that you're an NGO who's filed a case. The NGO is not affected directly by a law which prohibits sexual acts, because the NGO is obviously not going to indulge in sexual acts itself. So you have no standing to be in the court. nothing is affecting you, which is, of course, a completely false idea of public interest litigation, because the court was trying to chicken out. This was the Delhi High Court in 2004. But a concern arose through that what should we do in terms of challenging that decision? And that's where the community said, no, we'll go ahead, we'll take the risk of going to the Supreme Court and having it either sent, we wanted to be sent back to the Delhi High Court to be heard, which is exactly what happened eventually, or we will do something else if we lose, and we'll see what we'll do, but we'll take that chance. But the other thing which emerged over time was that we need to also get queer people into the courtroom. And this is why also I wanted to, I talked about the fictional narrative here, because the understanding is that apparently queer people approached the courtroom for the first time in 2016 when they filed the Navtej petition, which is completely not true. The truth of that matter I can go into also, but what is true is that Voices Against 377, which was a collective of child rights, women's rights, queer, and other organizations, came together and said, we are filing our intervention in support of the Nas case. And this happened because of this process of discussion and thinking, and how do we do this, and what is best? Let's have ourselves in the courtroom, A. B, and then other ideas. Let's have parents in the courtroom. Let's have mental health experts in the courtroom. Let's have historians in the courtroom. All of this emerged from some of that thinking. Who do we identify? Where can we get affidavits from? Who do we know who are mental health experts? All of these minutes, by the way, of these meetings are available on orinum.net. So everything is richly documented. It was the Voices petition which actually filed affidavits on behalf of at least 7 or 8 queer people in the courtroom saying this is how 377 impacts our lives. We're talking about the late 2000s when all this was done. That's when queer people themselves were in the courtroom. So, to say that this happened in 2016 is absurd. The other thing is this, that who were those people who filed those affidavits? It was the common queer experience. It was not, as the language in the Navtej petition is, that they were highly accomplished queer people who came to the court. These were not highly accomplished in the sense of they had great CVs, etc. But they were Indians, they were affected, and they were highly marginalized contexts, some of them, and they were voicing their views in the courtroom. And I think it was so vital that happened, because the court then became open to that voice being finally heard. Kokila's affidavit is one of the most powerful, again, available on orinum.net, about the brutality of her experience with police and rape and atrocity, and essentially her inability to go to the cops to complain because she knew she was essentially a criminal. It's just a supremely powerful thing. And it worked because all of that impacted the decision in 2009. So, the process had all these ways in which wonderful things happened. And I think the other thing about the process, and the last thing I'll say, is that, it really attempted to break down the barriers of language. So a lot of these meetings, of course, happen in English, but we had simultaneous translation going on. We had all these local level meetings. Every time I was in Bangalore, I used to give updates to the community groups there on what was going on in the case, because as you know, the case journey was a very long one. There was always someone translating into local languages. So, you were able again to kind of really get it out there in terms of, and that created also a sense of, if there is something which goes against us, we're going to protest. So you saw protests in everywhere from Madurai to, to larger cities and other contexts when things didn't go our way. And I think, I can't ascribe the pride marches which began to start happening in the late 2000s to this process, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some impact that it had in terms of how, and the other thing I think important to note is that in the queer community, I don't think most of us come from very different ideologies. We don't agree on almost anything. But here was this attempt to bring people in, and it succeeded in bringing people in with diverse points of view on something we could work together on. And I think there's so much to learn from that, even for today's queer battles. And I don't think today's queer battles are happening in this manner at all. So I think this story needs to be told. I'm glad you've given me this opportunity, and I hope I've answered somewhat, giving you a little bit of a flavor of what all of this actually was like. It was very exciting. It was hopeful. It was a sense of strength because of collectivism. It was also very enlightening because, a lot of the lawyers who were fighting the case didn't necessarily understand the nuance of queer realities at the ground level. Many of us were queer ourselves, open and out there, but some of those who were arguing the case didn't come from the community. All of this impacted the ways in which the court case was even vocalized in the courtroom. And so I think that's a lot of what the local activism was about. There are other people who can talk to you about it from their own vantage points, but as someone who organized a lot of this, that's at least a lot of what I took back. And all my work since then, whether it's been on queer stuff or other stuff on health, etc., the attempt is always to engage. Let's learn from. Let's not be arrogant about the law. Let's learn from other experiences to see that it gets reflected either in a legislative attempt or in a judicial action, etc.
Thank you for that. I mean, Vivek has written a lot about this, and I'm sorry that you have to repeat it again here. But I think it was something that people, I felt that it was important for people to listen from you first. And I'm glad that you spoke about this. I'll send the links to everyone in the mail that you get after the webinar. So you will get all the links of the readings that I have referred to and what Vivek had sent me. Yeah, Amrita, if you could talk about I mean, like I said, that how you see LGBT persons interacting with the court on a daily basis, on an everyday basis, quote unquote. And if you have any stories from your experience and anything that, since you must have a lot of stories because you work on a lot of cases, so if you have anything that you would like to share with us.
Thank you, Sonali, for organizing this and inviting me to this panel. And thank you, Vivek, for again bringing back the memories and the number of conversations we have had on this issue. I'll preface my response to your question with this comment that when I joined Lawyers Collective in 2009, NAS had just come out, the NAS Foundation judgment. And my first foray into the history of litigation, that as we call it, was actually to read those minutes of the consultations that Vivek was talking about and that Vivek organized when he was in Lawyers Collective. And what struck me most was because again, despite being I mean, I came from I'm from the community. I am a lawyer, but when you have that legal training, you basically think that lawyers know the best about the law or the legal strategies. So what really kind of amazed me was that how very, very nuanced legal strategies were being discussed in a consultation of 80, 90 people with equal participation from somebody who is a Kothi, somebody who's a Hijra activist, somebody who's a lawyer, somebody who is a gay man who has been harassed by police. So just look at the the kind of enriching discussions that had happened, which then would result in legal strategies that those lawyers would then adopt and they would get implemented in the court. Just the idea is alien to a lawyer, otherwise. Just the fact that, oh my God, because you think that you know how to interpret the law because it is quote unquote a specialized profession. So, so when, we are talking about how a queer person negotiates the law in the state. So this is the context that Vivek talked about. It was the context of, if you are criminalized for most of your life, if you are from your childhood and adolescence and your own relationship with your sexuality is so difficult first for you to kind of accept, and then to that it is quote unquote abnormal as per the society, and then there is a law which actually on paper criminalizes you. So what would be your relation with the law and the state? And no matter the point of law being that it could be a source for rights and empowerment is so remote for a queer person on the road that, it takes like Navtej and Naz and Nalsa to like come one after the other. Even then, if you talk to a transgender person who needs to change his documents, I mean, you will hear the story that what is happening on the ground. So the idea of the law and the state, mostly in my experience for the queer people on the ground, have been of fear, harassment, violence, and intimidation, as well as invisibility. And that we'll talk about the invisibility. So for the first time that as a community, you saw the law that, okay, it is not just about, criminalization, it is not just about harassment or police extorting me, was the Nas Foundation judgment. It is the first break in our understanding in terms of the queer community's relationship with the law and the state. So before that, I mean, the Vivek talked about the litigation strategy, the community consultation, the litigation, the 377 litigation part. But in terms of the how 377 was being applied, it was mostly, as Edwin Cameron had famously said, it was not about prosecution, it was about persecution. So in terms of, there were only handful of 200 reported cases in entire 150 years of 377's history, which then got thrown at us by the Supreme Court judge when the Supreme Court hearings in Kaushal was happening, that what harassment are you talking about? In last 150 years, not more than 200 reported cases have come. So, and the other judge said that what discrimination, don't come out, don't tell the world that you're homosexual, nobody will discriminate. And there is a moment there that Vivek, of course, you remember, and we all remember, was when the judge asked the counsel who was appearing for Voices Against 377 that I do not know any gay person in my life. I've never met. And senior counsel, Mrs. Shyam Devan, Vivek's brother, said that, they are part of my family, they're my friend, they're my colleagues. And there were queer lawyers sitting in that courtroom, and that moment will haunt me forever, that why did we not get up that day and make ourselves counted? Why did we just let that slide? So this is the context in which, Nas was, when, if Nas is the first break in the relationship between the queer person and the law, in terms of that law then could be seen as a source of rights and empowerment. And, and the stories that we saw, that we witnessed, that we ourselves experienced, was how Nas Foundation judgment was being carried by queer people, and it was being read in, kind of reading groups, and there were passages that were being because they were, for the first time you felt that, oh my God, the Constitution also is for me. It is not just for somebody who is, not part of this community. It is also for queer people. The constitutional promises of equality, justice, non-discrimination, and freedom are not just on paper, which then do not apply to me. They are equally applicable to me. And Justice Shah's famous words on inclusiveness. So that's the first time then you thought that, okay, law could be something else also. And the next 4.5 years, you saw the promise of Nas judgment. You saw the number of groups that came out. What Vivek is talking about, community consultation, the number of NGOs, the number of community groups, the pride marches. The pride marches started in 2008. Nas came in 2nd July 2009. And just in those 4.5 years, when we talk about impact, or even if you're talking about impact of Navtej, it's not, you have to feel it to actually understand. It's not something tangible, like I can tell you that, no, Sonali, the ABC is the impact. It's exactly like when Nas had also happened, you could feel literally you felt it in the air. You could breathe lightly. You do not always have to watch your back. You do not always have to, if I'm staying with my boyfriend, the policeman can come knocking at my door and I'll be put behind bars. So just think about the sheer relief that you can just live your life with, your minimum. It's basic. And that's what I want to come to, that if it really, in my experience, in terms of the number of people that we deal with on a daily basis from the queer community, and as Vivek said, these are very regular people. These are not super accomplished people, and they are coming from places like Hisar. They're coming from places like all over Punjab, Mohali, Haryana, Rajasthan, UP, your Saharanpur, or Aligarh. So these are all places that are not Delhi, Bombay, that have not had a history of like queer spaces in terms of nightclubs, or there are still queer couples who come to us who actually do not know any other queer person except their partner, and they have never shared their queerness with their friends because they always thought that the friends would never understand or judge them or discriminate against them. So the only queer person they know is their partner. That is why sometimes we also kind of look at our clients. I'm like, hey, you have just met 6 months back. Like, you really want to take this very big decision of leaving your family, leaving your education midway, and come to a different city and to be with your partner? And they're like, yes, we are very sure. And these are mostly lesbian women of early 20s or mid 20s, or trans man and cis woman, again early 20s. So it is what I'm trying to say is the parameters of law and the state still remain the same. It is the interaction in terms of my own understanding of law and the state has now changed because of Naz and then Navtej. That now we are getting calls from literally all parts of Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, where they would never ever earlier think of acting on their desires or actually have a faith or hope that they can stay with their partner. But again, at the same time, but when they're interacting with the law, so if it comes to their desire, they just do not want, they don't want to have anything to do with law, state. It's still very alien, intimidating. People have never gone to a courtroom. They have not even visited a police station. So they just want to live their life with the limited desires that they have with their partner. They want to have finished their education. They want their documents to reflect their gender. So it's these basic things that then they are met with a legal hurdle. So most of the clients that we deal with are for the first time coming to us because when they wanted to exercise their sexuality or their gender identity, they met with a problem in terms of the family did not agree. The family is threatening them. They have to leave their family. The family is not accepting the relationship, and there is a police complaint. There is a missing complaint filed against the partner. There is a false case of kidnapping against the partner. So this is the first time they're interacting with the law, and that interaction still is in that quote unquote, it's a negative interaction. The first interaction with the law is still not where the law is actually protecting their rights. It is still where they're meeting a legal hurdle, and then we are using Navtej, then we are using NALSA to say that, hey, their rights are now fully protected. So it is from the community, when you ask a question, how they are negotiating law and the state, they are still negotiating from a position of where they constantly have to justify their sexuality, their decisions, their actions. Law is constantly still, or the law is being used by the family or the police to make the gains of, whether it's Naz or Navtej, kind of invisible. And because there is also now a pool of lawyers and NGOs because we have the gains from, Naz to Navtej, that we can push back and say that, no, now you can no longer do this. So it is a mix. And honestly, once we get that order of police protection, or once we get the person released from the family detention, They just want to live nicely and quietly. They don't want to become activists in some face of some constitutional challenge. They want to have finish their education, get a job, rent a room, just don't want the family, at their like breathing down their necks. They just want that. They do not want to, like, we tell them, do you want to file a case against your family? You have faced so much. People have faced horrendous violence in their families. And they're like, no, we just want to, we just want to just get done with this. I just want to live with her. I just want to live with my partner. And we want to live quietly. So still, but, again, that's the thing. The law is then a mixed bag. At the end of the day, it is these constitutional judgments that are protecting their rights. But still on the ground, the police, the families, or even sometimes the magistrates are still operating from the pre-decriminalization era of mindset, or even or even in their mind, they think the law is still that old law. But then they have to be told that, hey, no, now you please. So it's a constant task. It's a constant, and of course there are not every police person is somebody who is homophobic or transphobic. There would be exceptions, but that's not the rule. Yeah, so I'll talk about the impact in the next question.
Just can I come in on two things quickly? One is, Amrita, that moment you described in the courtroom in 2012, when the court asked Sham Divan, the lawyer, that do you know anyone who's gay? It's a flabbergasting moment because those affidavits were in the courtroom. These were the gay people. These were the gay people, but you're ignoring them because they were not people of privilege. And you wanted to rule against us. That became so clear. And I've written about it. I've just sent the link. And actually, Arvind Narayanan was sitting in front of me in the courtroom, and I was about to pull his gown and say, let's all stand up. Let's all stand up, because there are at least 24 of us gay in the courtroom. Many of us open and out in the world at large. Let's do that, because this will, and I write about the fact that, we were not in a Bollywood film set where you stand up and you do some nachna gana and say I'm gay, and then the court will do some flourish. It was a Supreme Court of India, so that's probably the reason why. I mean, I certainly know that I paused and I said, no, I can't just get up in the middle of this randomly, but it was an absurd question. The other point, which Amrita raised about, the police continuing to be problematic as a rule, etc. One of the very clear directives of the Navtej judgment is that it is the government's responsibility to educate everyone across the country, the government servants and police and the state servants, about this judgment. Clearly, that's not happened. I mean, there's been no attempt to tell people who can wield these kinds of powers that, sorry, you cannot wield these powers against queer people anymore. There's been absolutely zero attempt to do that. Sorry.
No problem at all. So I'm going to skip a certain part of the question that I had given you, and I'm going to go towards the invisibilization part, and I'm going to ask about that first, because I feel like still you've spoken about the court and how the court could not see while you were there in the courtroom, and it was still blind to the idea of a community that was standing there in front of them and confronting them. You also spoke about coming out before your parents, because way before decriminalization. And Amrita also spoke about how this invisibilization is imposed, and also when she said that there was Nas in the air, I also get that the idea of Pride March and being visible then becomes very important, and it becomes almost as if a statement of owning yourself, owning your identity, and you more so, Vivek, because you were owning your identity at the time you were criminalized, and even Jitender did that. And all of this, and I would like to, I know that originally I posed this question to Jitender and you, but I think that Amrita can also weigh in that there have been many people like you and who have come before you and after you and have done the same thing, and even today are at a certain point are marginalized. And Foucault says that marginalization in the history of sexuality, that state is always not very good with like dealing with sexuality. It tries to like hide it in some sense to the outwards and to the marginalized. That is why I want to ask you why it is important to own, or what do you see when you say that I am coming out? What is that movement like, more so theoretically, also in sense of owning and visibilizing yourself and challenging yourself to the state first? I'd like to ask first to Jitender, and then Vivek, you could, and then Amrita, if you want to come in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonali. First of all, this amazing conversation. I was just listening to Vivek and Amrita, and I think it's always important to remember the kind of history 377 has gone through. And when Vivek was talking about HIV, the only thing when someone talks about HIV, I only remember this point that the COVID happened, and suddenly within a year we had the vaccines. And after so many years, millions of gays and LGBT people dying, and now finally we are going through the first phase of trials. So that already shows the amount of attention one would like to pay from the state side to the LGBT community. So living in a society which is already telling you that, hey, we don't care about you, you're dying, it's a gay man's disease, is a sinful disease, or it's any other kind of a disease. We have cases, and because I also joined this activist circles from a very different kind of a politics. I joined the student politics from 2014. So my engagement was more like an ally with different movements, from farmers movement to labor movements to all the student politics that goes on to the campus, and then finally going into the 377 movement that was happening. Because the recent memory for us was just about 2013 Suresh Kaushal judgment, which was very horrendous. And remember reading the interview of the Suresh Kaushal person himself, published, and saying outrageous things on media, and everyone just like, okay, we don't have any other way but to like, say that, oh, I don't exist as a person, so I can just, as much as I can pass, it's fine. And I think that's where the question of coming out also sort of comes in, because it's a layered concept for many of us. Because when I was young, I can only speak from my experience, the more you pass, the better it is, because then you don't have to feel with the harassment, you don't have to deal with the teachers. So anyone, even if you complain, so if I am getting bullied by my cousins, because they would say that, oh my god, the hijra is going, the chakka is going, the abuses are also transphobic, and suddenly you're just like, yo, whom should I tell? And you tell your parents, and parents say, ki, ha, then walk straightly, na, like walk like a man. Why your hand gestures are like this and all that? I think, and then you grow up in that kind of a setting, and when you sort of get this consciousness in the student politics, where your recent memory is cautial judgment, and you would see that there is no such acceptance, and to be able to navigate your own way, to find sort of a queer families, or kinships around built with queerness and around queerness, then I think it's become like a release space where you finally start to see. So before any kind of coming out with the families or with the friends or anything, the first coming out one happens, with your own self. You feel like, who are the friends who are queer friendly? Who are the people who will not say that, oh my God, like, what are you telling me? You don't look like LGBT, you don't look any other thing. Why are you saying all these things? So I think that's the point where you feel like really weird. And even I think especially in the campuses, because we have like a very different dynamic in the campuses, you're always scared of certain kind of people. You're just like, oh, if that person gets to know, who's like a gunda type person, if he knows that I'm homo or I'm queer person, the first thing this person will do and start harassing me. Otherwise, who's just high-fiving me in the canteen. But the next moment he'll do that. So you're also like navigating your own spaces and trying to build your comfort spaces to come out and say that, okay, finally I can come out. And as Amrita pointed out very rightly, that the laws, even the like normal laws becomes like really problematic. So law that would be used in a very exceptional condition will become like really normalized. So even if you're roaming around street, a police person sees you roaming around with your friends, you also get a slap कि तुम भी queer ही हो गए, तुम क्यों ऐसे घूम रहे हो? I don't want to say any abusive word, because I still feel like people should not like get disbarred with those words and should not associate many identities with those words. So they would also give you a slap and they'll tell you कि अच्छा तुम भी ऐसे ही हो गए इनके जैसे, वहाँ पे क्या कर रहे हो? And just to extort money, they'll start threatening you कि हम तुम पे चार लगा देंगे, वो लगा देंगे. And when you see all this is happening, so it becomes really, really difficult to sort of like coming out. And as queer people, it's a very famous, like a television, very kind of a pop culture statement these days, that we queer people build our own family. And there is a lot of truth to it, right? It's not like an empty statement. You would see many queer people not finding acceptance at home, not finding acceptance at workspaces, even today in 2021. And when Vivek and Amritananda both were talking about Nas, Nalsa, and Navtej, I was just thinking that even with all these laws, companies and all these places are still struggling with, giving a job, and they get horrified when when you tell them, ki, Acha, this person is coming, their dead name was something, and their new chosen name is something, the dead gender was something, their chosen gender is something, or the gender they associate with is something. They get horrified and they just think like, oh my God, now we have to change all the policies around it. So how are we gonna do that? So then next coming out becomes like, how do you even come out in your workspaces and be comfortable sort of like in your own skin? And I think once you get into that, then you're wondering whether you want to come out to these spaces or not. It's I'm lucky enough to finally get into the organization, which is a queer-led organization. So I never had to deal with. But in my previous organization, I definitely had to like think twice before telling someone, even that even with my non-binary identity, even to explain someone with non-binary is, it becomes like a horrible process that people don't themselves want to go onto the internet. I mean, they'll go for like million other things for the internet, but for this particular thing, they don't even want to like check. They want you to be the encyclopedia, and they just want you, they just take you for granted and ask you questions like which will make you uncomfortable. They're like, yeah, Acha, at what age you discovered that you were non-binary? Acha, when did you get the language of this? Can you describe the incident of violence from your life and all that? And all of a sudden, you also wonder like, hey, what are we discussing here? Like, I was just sharing something, and all of a sudden, it becomes like a KBC kind of a moment, right? Someone wants to play some sad music behind me, and I have to narrate a sad story to get their acceptance. And I think that becomes like really problematic, because already you have all these circles to like deal with, and then comes your family. And like, I came out to my family in 2014, but unfortunately I couldn't tell them that I'm non-binary much later, because I still don't have the language to like even explain to them, or we haven't had that kind of a space where we can openly have a discussion about this particular identity. Their idea is just like, Acha, whatever you do, just don't let anyone, come inside the house. So even if it's my lover, or it's someone I want to date, or even a queer friend, they should not come to the house, but you can come and stay. So then you also feel like whether you want to coming out or not. And I think that's why it becomes really important to also navigate the spaces for coming out. And what do we even mean by coming out? Like, why do we have to do this continuous practice with multiple circles, only to get like more, only to get like more kind of these like questionings again and again, someone questioning your ideas, someone saying that, hey, but you never tried walking straight, hey, but you never tried, you never had any kind of intimate relationship with any other gender, how can you claim this? So all these questions make you wonder whether even you want to come out or not. And within a state that we are living right now, I think with the coming out is also like the structural violence that one could face. So even if I'm coming out, I don't know how many of my friends, even on my social media Instagram, would sort of plot and plan and say that, oh, this person did this, maybe we could do something to this person. And there have been incidents regarding political ideology, but I haven't explored the gender identity and sexuality, because the threat is always there. So one also would tend to not uh, tend to like navigate the kind of spaces you want to come out. So I think coming out doesn't just become like a family affair. It becomes a way to like come out and be create your own family. Like, I think when you were asking for the bios, I also sent that I play online games with my queer and non-binary friends, and I think that's the best family I could gather in this age, and with this computer and everything, especially in the 1.5 year lockdown, that you could find players online and you're playing games, and through that you're discovering your sexuality. And I think that I found like a really interesting way, where without saying anything, we were playing this one time Dungeon and Dragons, and we had to choose our own gender identities, and we could only create your we could create our own avatars and draw what kind of a person we would be. We're in a fantasy world. And I think those kind of ways becomes really important, and that's the new generation that's sort of like um, doing a different kind of coming out, which is like very different on social media, very different on these gaming platforms, very different with the families, completely different with their friends, and more completely different with their own queer friend, because I think there are like multiple coming outs that needs to take place. So that's a little bit that I want to add up, and I think I'm really happy that I got to hear the history, because my dissertation was also on Navtej Johar, so I have already read a lot of links that you have just shared about Vivek and about the history of 377. But it's always like really interesting and passionate to like hear what Vivek was saying and what Amrita was describing. That's the kind of work I'm currently engaged with, and I totally resonate with the idea where the people don't want to be an activist but just want to live their lives. Uh, a nice room with a partner without the interference of the law, state, and society at the same time. They just want to have a peaceful life. And I think after a 1 year, more than a 1 year of a pandemic and so many deaths around it, I think many people are looking forward to like some kind of peace and stability, even within the conditions that we are right now, politically saying or socially saying. Yeah, thank you.
No, that was really very interesting, especially about the gaming that Jitender was talking about. I mean, I'm not of that generation, so very, very interesting to hear about that. But I also, just to emphasize his point, I think when he started by talking about HIV and COVID, if COVID was impacting only the queer community or sex workers and marginalized people, there'd be no way that there'd be a vaccine for it. There's just no way. So you're absolutely right. And I think HIV also was fascinating. I mean, it's tragic, but it's also been a fascinating movement of a kind, because it really pushed the boundaries of the right to health to the extent that it did. And it pushed for at least treatment to be available to people who can't afford it, because of activism, not because of any government beneficence or anything. Anyway, on the question of coming out, I think Jitender said it absolutely right, and I'm sure it's the experience of most of us who've come out in various ways, that it's a constant process. It seems to me, I came out because I felt that the people I loved needed to know who I really was, and this was at the age of 19, 20, uh, way back, and I thought that my family needed to know, and my best friends needed to know, and if they were okay with it, I really couldn't care about the rest of the world. This was my thinking at that age. And so I did come out to them, and I've had a very, 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 very positive journey. So, it's been exceptional. I think it was exceptional then, it's exceptional now. It's really been positive. Many of my family actually were part of the case. But forget about that. It's just the extraordinary support that I've received from everyone that way. There was definitely a concern around homophobia within my friend circle and whether I should be telling them or not. But again, I was just very, very fortunate, and I remain fortunate to this day in that sense. I felt I faced homophobia, but I really, what coming out did to me to that extent was it just made me more confident in a way I can't describe. It's very hard for me to describe what it did as a 21-year-old to know that the people who I care about were fine with this. It was, friends of, and then when I started meeting other queer people, my straight friends used to tell me that, Vivek, it's crazy to see you. You're a different person, because it seems you finally found a world, which is the world which we will never be able to understand fully because we're not queer. But they were sensitive enough to realize that. So it's been a really, it just it elevates you in a certain way. I don't know else to say it. But also to say that coming out is complicated to I should also say that as an activist, I think, and I understand the reasons why people don't, and I think Jitender and Amrita both spoke to that, but I understand why people don't come out, but I think it's really important that we do if we can, to the extent that we can. It's a very old school kind of way of activism maybe, but I still think it's powerful. I think there's a visibility which is required, because and actually also, I've come out in a room of judges, in a room of policemen, in a room of all kinds of funny rooms, and I've rarely got a homophobic response in those contexts. It's quite amazing. I think people are curious fundamentally, but of course there is tragic violence and stuff which others deal with. You have to acknowledge your privilege in all of this also. I mean, I'm privileged. I move in a privileged circle relatively to most Indians. And so, there's all of that which is involved. But I should also say that coming out is curious because I remember that uh, I remember my mom asking me when I was in my late 20s, that Vivek, a lot of our friends are now asking about your marriage because you're now of that age, 27, 28, 29. What do you want us to say? So I said to her, Ma, they are your friends. They're not my friends. So you say what you want to them. I'm out. I couldn't be bothered. And she said, we would like to tell them that you're gay. I said, fantastic, because for me, that was the ultimate sign of her own empowerment. Forget about mine, that she was super comfortable with it. But then I remember in 2004, the case was thrown out in the Delhi High Court on locus standing, as I described. And we were very disciplined lawyers. In the legal, as maybe audiences know, judges are, at least at one time, used to be very averse to, you either litigate in the courtroom or you litigate in public opinion, but you don't do both. So we never used to go to the media. As lawyers, we never went to the media to litigate the 377 case, except at that moment when we were invited to be on television and write in the press, when we were neither in the Delhi High Court or in the Supreme Court. There were a span of a few months. And I was invited to be on the Karan Thapar show, and it's recorded. Luckily, I mean, all these archives are all available. And Justice Father Emmanuel of the Roman Catholic Bishops' Conference was also on the program, as was Anjali Gopalan. And at one point, Father Emmanuel started saying things like, this is all deviants and diseased people, and they're disgusting, and, best if they are just kept where they are. And I said to myself, if I don't come out now, if I don't say I'm gay now, it would be ridiculous. And of course, at the workplace by then, I was completely out because, I was working on HIV. If you work on HIV and, you're working with communities, you have to yourself engage with that and be honest about who you are. So I came out on the Karan Thapar show in 2004. And I said, I'm sorry, but I have to object to what the good father is saying, because this is just, it's so violent, your language. And I can't remember the exact words, but basically pushing back. And actually, Thapar asked Father Emmanuel, do you think Mr. Divan is a diseased, deviant, disgusting person? And Emmanuel had to, kind of restrain himself, I think. But the text messages I got from people, and some people who had told other people, and people who ever watched the show, I think it was just incredible for friends and acquaintances who had seen it. And I think, from what I could tell, had derived strength from seeing me there saying who I was. So, but for me, I went out of the studio at Churchgate in Bombay, where I was being recorded from, and got into a taxi and went home. And I was saying to myself in that moment at 9:30 in the evening in Bombay that, oh my God, I just came out on national TV, which was a whole other understanding of what coming out was. It was just like this other thing. Similarly, many years later, or a few years later, I was asked to speak at the United Nations before all the representatives of government 5 months after Navtej judgment in New York. And I spoke as an openly gay man. It was also a really weird feeling because I said, oh my God, now the Egyptian representative is sitting there and the Caribbean guy from God knows what other country, and they're asking me questions about what do I think and why do I think the way I do and what will happen to society. And here I am speaking as an openly queer person at an international level, which was just another weird thing. And today I still meet people who, when I'm with my partner, I have to say this is my partner, and that's when they realize, oh, this is a gay couple or whatever they call us. So coming out is constant, it seems to me. But I think the biggest lesson I took from it was it gave me a sense of peace in myself. It just gave me a lot of relief that, now it's for others to deal with, not for me, because I've really dealt with it. If I've reached that point of, being honest to myself about myself.
Yeah, Amrita, if you could.
Yeah, Jitender and Vivek have really captured the different experiences and aspects of coming out. I just like to add 2 points. I'll talk about coming out in lawyering and coming out at a personal level. So before, so like from Kaushal to Navtej, whenever we would be representing like, lesbian couples or like queer couples, it would always be a discussion between like me and the, my partner Mihir, and we would be discussing that should we disclose the sexuality, especially if it's like a gay relationship. Like, for like trans people, the gender identity was not so much of an issue after Nalsa, but it was always like, even uh, like even after Navtej, because you are constantly, again, like we know lawyering judges, it's like judges who your matter goes to is like a matter of lottery. So, and whether that person has I mean, the law of the land is fine, but there are people who are extremely like biased and prejudiced, and we have had these experiences where the judge, because he has to follow the law of the land, he said that no, not before me. He recused himself from the matter just because it involved a queer person. So but after Navtej, basically what has happened is, earlier we would be saying they were in a very close relationship, they are very close friends, they are like best friends of each other and everything. But after Navtej, we are so now open in our pleadings and in our in how we draft petitions. Like, we really talk about and put emphasis on the relationship, on the how they met, and how the closeness, the intimacy, and how that is now protected. So it is, I think, as a lawyer also, it is quite powerful for me to even draft these petition and trying to put the, and of course, I mean, it's just impossible to capture the, the kind of intricacies and the particular context of each case. I mean, each case, if I try to capture it, it will become a book, because each person comes with so much of like background, and the kind of experiences they have had, and how they have met, and what they have faced, and now their own vision of life, and their desires and what they want. So but now we make it a point to, like, not shy away, not like, be very emphatic in our assertion of like the people we are representing, the community we are representing, and also like basically their experiences. And we make it a point to kind of that be the center of the petition, and not like, just legalese type. So that has been, again, I would say, one big change from in the last 3 years. And secondly, I think I'll talk a bit about, being a lawyer from the community, working on these cases primarily, and going to the high courts and Supreme Court. And so there is often this also, there is a fear that you do not want to be typecasted, because we want to be taken seriously as lawyers per se, so that we also do all other work, because all other work enriches us and equips us to deal with LGBT cases in a much more nuanced fashion, and deal with all kind of issues that come from queer clients. So it is a constant, I would say, like a dilemma of how much you want to kind of course, nobody's shying away from their identity, but it's like how much you want to kind of trump it. So even when we started our independent practice, it was started in 2017. uh, so me and here, we envisioned our office also as a safe space for the queer people. So there are so many cases of where, I mean, I'll just give you one example that just happened last week, where this uh, person who was in a relationship with a trans man from Hisar, and the woman's family filed a case, missing complaint against the partner. They had come to Delhi. They managed to escape the family situation, and the woman's family filed a case against in the missing complaint, and like kind of implicated the partner's family. The partner was constantly like called by the Hisar police, come give a statement. His parents, his family was taken to the police station, harassed. So and they had come to Gurgaon, and we had arranged for the woman to stay at a shelter home in Delhi. And there was a gap that she was supposed to go in the evening to the shelter home, and the family and the police came to Gurgaon in the morning. So there was a gap of 6-7 hours where she had nowhere to go. And we just I told her, just leave your house, just leave the house and come to the Delhi jurisdiction. And she said, yeah, but where will I go? Because I can only go to the shelter home, at like 5 p.m. So I said, just come to our office. And this is how our office was envisaged, and this is how it has also panned out, as a very as a space where, we have had. So she spent like 6 hours in our office. I asked my office boy to open the office, whatever, and she spent 6 hours, and then she went to the shelter room. And then in so many other cases where we are representing one of the couples, and they are either staying in the shelter home, or they haven't been able to meet the partner. So then on the day of the hearing, the person comes and appears now on video conferencing before the court, and we call the partner also, and they meet. And then if that person has to, after the hearing, go back to the shelter home, so that for that couple of hours, she could meet her partner. So, but at the same time, this is also quote unquote a regular firm, a regular lawyer office. So there is a constant kind of our own discussion with ourselves, like how much do we want to really make it like a queer office, or is there a distinction between should we kind of have kind of pretend to be all mainstream and lawyerly, or should we so it's a very thin line. And we were having a discussion that should we put up the pride flag in the conference room of our office, or should we have it in our individual rooms? And this is in the individual room. So it is, so I'm saying these are the negotiations you also make as a professional, and especially in a profession where we know the kind of reverence that has to be given to the judges, the kind of uh, like boys club that happens, also me being a woman, and then a queer person, and being a lawyer. So it is again like something that you are kind of negotiating at a daily level. And even when we are representing in and it just so happens, sometimes we are worried because we are constantly going before the same set of judges, and we are constantly arguing like same kind of cases for queer people. So we are like, oh my god, and so another call from Nazariya comes, and we have to go to court, and we are like, oh my god, I can't again face that judge, because she's just going to like, what do you like, don't you have any other work? Don't you have really no other work except to represent lesbian couples who are facing family violence, and you want police protection or habeas writ for them? So it again, it is something that we are dealing, negotiating on a daily basis, and it's not easy. But at the same time, it is we are very proud that we are doing the kind of work we are doing, and we are kind of openly talking about queer desires and relationships in court. And not always we get a very receptive judge, but the fact that we are getting orders after orders, that shows that once you start hitting brick by brick, it does, the edifice does kind of fall, or at least it gets dented in a big way in terms of the structural, the heteropatriarchal structure that is also very much part of the judiciary.
Um, Thank you for that. I would just weigh in and say that it's already 7:20. So, like I promised 7:30 till the bit. If it's fine if the talk extends to like 15-20 minutes more, than because we have a lot of questions also.
I have no problem.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm fine till 8. I have something after 8. Yeah.
No problem from my side also.
So people, please stick on because I'll be asking your questions also. So I have sort of mixed two questions, which I wanted to ask first was you spoke about family institutions, and you spoke about how More so like Jitender, I know him personally. So I know Jitender has written a so Jitender has a blog. If anyone wants to read it, and you can understand more about what I'm going to ask. So family institutions often mimic the state and society's patriarchal mindset. And the most recent example was Madras High Court judgment, among other things that you have already mentioned, Amrita. Um, and also that this person has asked in the chat, and I'm sort of taking those questions and making as I go. LGBTQ communities continuously prone to domestic violence since their childhood and their parents and near relatives. And many people don't know how and whom to approach for relief. So please talk about that and how they can approach. So I'll just ask in two questions at how you see family institutions first, because something that I could not like add to the entire uh, conversation that we have was how, like, what I understood is that coming out is not like a movement, it's like a compilation of movements, and it is a process of how you come out on different places and different people, and how that uh, but also like families is also like a patriarchal setup, but also one that is closed and the first institution you approach even before the court. I would like to ask how you see the role of family institutions, and especially during quarantine when there were several news and I mean stories about how transgender persons and queer people from the queer community are struggling to actually stay within their house because of domestic violence and other mental health issues, etc. So, how can one combat that while living within the institution? And if you have any websites or any, like, you can plug in Nazariya and you can plug in your, um, I mean, your practice because you're doing pro bono also. So, yeah, these two questions. Anyone can answer. I mean, Jitender hasn't spoken for a while, so I think Jitender can go first, and then
Yeah, thank you, Sonali, for this question. And I was also going through the questions that are there in the chat. Um, like, how do we family institution? I think being especially in India, we emphasize a lot on family, and I think and that keeps reminding me like how Foucault writes how citizens are made, and the idea of command, like you're taught from the very young age like how to follow the commands. So if an elder in your family is saying something, that you're just supposed to assume that it's good for you, and that's the first training we get as someone as a young child. You need to follow. So when you put that kind of a framework on your sexuality and gender, it's the same kind of idea, right? They tell you that even if you're gay, even if you can't do anything about it, please maintain some kind of a heteronormative an idea of binary, just don't be femme. Like in my particular family, many people tell me that don't be femme. I have saris and I have gehnes in my cupboard, and they would get like horrified by when they see it, and they assume that they're not Jitender's, but someone Jitender's friend who didn't have enough space, so they have it in there. So I think that's the kind of negotiation one has to deal with, and you have to be fine with it, rather than saying these are mine. And I think that's the authority figure you're continuously reminded of, that you can't go against. Just like the if a policeman screams at you on the road, you know that it's a threat call. You might have done something, or if not, the policeman is going to put something on you. And that's the similar kind of a command you also get when your family instinctively ask you why this particular clothing and why this is some sort of happening. And when you put a situation like pandemic and a lockdown, when you see you don't have any other escape. So queer people also form a lot of friendship-based communities, queer-based communities and kinships and safe houses. Like my safe house has never been one particular kind of a safe house. It's been multiple kind of a safe house. One friend's house in SDA will be a different house, or one friend's house in North Campus will be a different particular house. So I would always, go around. So whenever if I feel like I can't sustain this kind of arguments, I would go to different kind of houses. But when the lockdown happens, you would see that you can't go anywhere. You have to stick to the family. So then, how do you navigate? And I think that's what we as part of Nazariya, we also saw this rise of, so Nazariya also runs a helpline. If anyone want to go back to, I'll just put that link um, of Nazariya in the chat box also. So we also run a helpline where queer people who are facing violence threats, they can reach out to us, and if someone is going through mental health issue, they can reach out to us. We have a peer support service. So we saw this rise of like cases all of a sudden. So earlier when we were getting maybe around 10 or 15 calls maybe in 2 weeks, all of a sudden we are seeing like, we are getting like 40 calls or 50 calls, someone saying that, I'm facing violence at my home. What do I do? I need to run away from my family. So then the dilemma is that even if you tell this person to leave your house, uh, but how do you then manage the COVID situation? What if you get the coronavirus? How will we then take care of you? Especially when India's health structure is very bad. And as we saw, like the last month, people were literally struggling for oxygen, and they were literally struggling for even a bed or even medicine. You would see so many calls being put up on Instagram and Twitter. So how do you then deal with a situation like this where you know that some person is facing violence? So then you also start negotiating with the person itself that, see, till the point there is no threat to your life, don't leave your house, because this situation is very exceptional and we won't be able to help you if you get the virus. So try to, stay alive in your house until there is a threat on your life, then you leave, then there is no other option. Then there is a choice between. And many couple, as Amritananda was also talking about, many couple, we do advise them, come back and we'll try to find a safe house for you. And it is a really tedious task to, with every single case, you need to go back to the same thing. And then the family enters, and with their cases and with their allegation, you have ruined our children. Oh, this particular Nazariya has been, brainwashing our children, and they are not this, they're normal. And many of my colleagues would get like abuses from the family. So the family as an institution, then you see the oppressiveness of the institution of a family getting like larger and larger. And though I'm really extremely happy for Vivek's case, that Vivek didn't have to face homophobia. And I think, and as Vivek has himself already said, there is an exception even today's time. Even today's time, if you find a biological family who's willing to accept you, and those families do exist. There is no denial in that. But at the same time, a huge number of families, they don't accept uh, of the LGBTQIA and plus identities, and people do face violence. Many of the groups that I'm part of, be it the gaming groups or be it the other groups, many people, whenever they move out of the house, they would always share it as a celebratory news. I managed to get away from the family. I have finally have a room of my own. Finally, I can assemble my books on a wall and put a plant there and put a pride flag and put my partner's photo on the desk. And finally, I can put even the nude images of the celebrity that I have a crush on. I can finally do all that, which you can't do when you're inside a family. Even within these joys, you can see how the family as an institution sort of like pushes you towards these silo that you can exist in a corner of the house till the point you're being acceptable, you're being passable, you're not causing any kind of a dishonor to the family, you're following the commands. If they're telling you that you need to get married in 16 months or 6 months, you need to be ready for that, and you're not allowed to ask any questions. Um, and I think as we are progressing and moving away from the 2021 and the pandemic, and with everything, I think people need to start redefining the idea of families and redefining the ideas of what it means to be with the family. And I think it's absolutely fine if one person wants to move away from the family, because I think family is the only kind, or the family members are the only kind of member that you don't choose. Those people are just happen because you took birth in their house. And I think that's the one learning that people need to start understanding, that it's okay to create your own family when your own biological family is not there for you. And I think as queer persons, not just now but for like ages, have been struggling with this idea of family, because a lot of emotions have been attached, a lot of, and it's very difficult for people to even get out of their houses, even if they're facing violence or something within the house, because they think that, oh, that's my mother, how can I leave her alone with the violent father or the violent brother that's there. But I think at one point people do need to like start acknowledging, because the fights are not just at the 377. The fights are beyond that. The fights are at the harassment law, the fights at the violence that people are facing, especially trans person who are facing violence almost everyday basis, the sex workers who are facing violence. So people need to also think that there are multiple kind of violences, and once you're away from the institution of family, have created a different kind of a family for your own self, then you can engage with the law in a much larger manner, not just because beyond marriage, because right now we have many petitions in the court around marriages. So I think one also needs to move away from the marriages and think like what are the other ways laws can provide you protection in your work life. Law can ensure that you don't get discriminated against. Law can ensure that not a random person in the street can throw something at you, or say some abuses, or say something, anything to you, and can get away thinking that, who can, I don't give a damn about these people. So I think that's the move that needs to happen, and family as an institution sort of like contributes into that, and I think that's how people need to like sort of start shifting away from the family and more reliance on the queer family. Especially, I can vouch for that because as Sonali is a close friend and she knows like how much my queer family really supported me when I was really sick for a 1 year long period of time, and that made me realize, that this is my own biological family was not there, and all the queer family, even my AUD department came and they supported me. And I think I would still say that, it was a privilege that I was in a right place at the right time. But the reliance other than the biological family needs to happen. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Amrita, if you could like weigh in. So I'll ask, sorry, but like since we are tight on time, so I'll ask all of you to keep your answers a little short. And yeah,
No, I completely agree with whatever Jitender has said, and that's like totally borne out from the work that we do. And in our experience, like I've written about it also. Family is literally the first and the biggest site of violence against queer people, and the law has changed. We have had now judgments after judgments and good judgments, and I'm not talking about the Supreme Court judgments. I'm now talking about the High Court orders that we are getting like almost every 2 weeks in terms of providing protection, saying LGBTQIA people have fundamental right to be with whoever they want, to exercise their sexuality, gender identity. But as an institution, the family has such a strong hold on other institutions like police, like judiciary, like judges. So, and when I'm talking about family as an institution, it's the patriarchal notions of like what is normal, heteronormativity, like the right age for marriage, and what Jitendra was saying, like how to walk, talk, kind of be. So, and these ideas are also very much rooted in, we know the state and the structure of the state and the institutions, whether giving primacy to the marriage, and which relationship gets recognized and which doesn't. So so while we have the protection or the tool of the law in terms of now the law is on your side and you can't get criminalized or discriminated, but to explain it to the police, who is so outraged on behalf of the family because the policeman there is thinking that meri beti bhag gayi hai. So he is literally projecting the outrage and the quote unquote the violation of the honor of that particular family on himself, and like saying, and Jitendra rightly said, Nazariya and Rituparna and Tambra have faced, and we also have faced so much of vile abuses from the families. Like we literally have been told in the court that these guys are brainwashing. They have like there have been allegations of prostitution against the organ, like the groups. Then and I'll give one example where this again lesbian couple, we were seeking protection from the court, and and again it's so emotionally exhausting for people who are doing this work, like whether as lawyers or for the groups, the NGOs that are working, because it's like, imagine just like the emotional drama that you're being subject to in every case. And in one case where this we were appearing for one of the partners of lesbian couple, and her family came to court and they started crying, and it was like literally a group of like 30 people, okay, and they were old, they were kids, and they all started crying, and the judge got, her heart got melted, and she was just telling uh, the family that बच्चे हैं ठीक है, आप क्या कर सकती है, गलती करेंगे, फिर अभी आपके साथ नहीं रहना चाहते, अपनी गलती मान लेंगे, समझ जाएंगे, फिर वापस आ जाएंगे, आप जबरदस्ती नहीं कर सकती. But her heart was completely for the family, because and the girl is saying that in the court, which is again very brave of that girl. She was 19-year-old and she said ये सब ड्रामा है, बाहर जाके ही मुझे मारेंगे. And the judge didn't like the fact that she questioned her family's quote unquote affection in an open court. So similarly, when we are talking to the police and we are saying that why this person had to leave the house, and they are adult, they have chosen this decision completely on their own because of the violence, and like nahi, माँ बाप कैसे अपने बच्चे को मार सकते हैं, आप क्या बोल रही है मैडम? And so it's it is so much ingrained in like whether it's the police, whether it's like a bureaucrat, or whether it's like even a high court judge. And I'll just end with another example where we were representing a couple where the partner was trans and the woman was married, and she was kept in detention by her family because she had gone and stayed with the partner. And we filed a habeas petition in the High Court, and she was produced before the court. And the court, for the judges, first spoke to her, then they spoke to the partner, then they called me in. I went in. One of the judges, she was like holding her face like this, wouldn't even look at me. And she did not utter a word. She could not even look at the partner. And the other judge was like, counsel, I know the law is in your favor. She has every right to be with who she wants to be. But please understand the sensitivity. She is, I hope she knows what she's doing. I hope you have given her the right advice. I hope you're not just thinking this as your client issue. You are thinking of and I'm like, you can talk to them. You don't talk to me. The person, the petitioner, the detainee was 24 years old. She was absolutely clear that she did not want to go back to her natal family. She did not want to go back to her husband's family. She wanted to stay with her partner. So but look at the whole, look at the like sheer, like judges take it personally. They think, they actually start projecting their own insecurities about their children, that what if this was my child? What am I going to like do, say, or or how will I behave? So it is and I'll just add one line to what Jitender said, that what do you do? So okay, fine, you want to leave your family, or you are taking the action to leave your family, you are kind of dealing with the police bit and the false cases. The question is, what after? Where do you go? Where is the support system? It's been almost 3 years from Navtej, and Vivek rightly said there is a specific direction to sensitize all the authorities, whether it's the police, whether it's the other government officials, like to have counseling practices, reflect the queer affirmative counseling practices. But A, none of that has happened. And B, the biggest problem that we face is not to give legal service to clients who come to us, because we still mostly have the law on our side. It is, how do you advise somebody that, okay, you leave your house and come to Delhi where you have nowhere to put that person, like, in. So we have one shelter that was meant for domestic violence victims, that is now open to queer women. So that is one NGO run shelter that we are using. And otherwise now there are like few shelters for transgender persons, especially for trans men in Delhi and in other parts of India. But again, that's the thing, so those trans men shelters would not take the partner of the trans man. In the cis women shelter, they will not take the trans man partner of the woman. So then you have to literally separate, and we have had cases where we have had to separate the couple. Like one person goes into the trans man run shelter, and the other person goes into the the shelter meant for domestic, like wells for women. So and that is also of course people because they are the only source for each other, and it's extremely difficult at a very crucial time when they have left their family, they're extremely emotional, very sensitive stage, to be apart from the only source of support that they have, and and that relationship, which is the most important thing in terms of their own life. So because there is no option for all inclusive safe house for LGBTQIA persons, or or we have had cases where people have stayed in activist houses for weeks and months. So it is so the crisis work that Jitender was talking about, and what I've been talking about, you have the declaration of Navtej is there, which has given people hope. So everybody thinks that okay, fine, now the law is on my side, let me get out of the house, I'll live with my partner. But the corresponding responsibilities and obligations of the state have completely not materialized. So there is now a huge gap between aspiration and the reality. And and we are doing piecemeal work in terms of one individual case, and we'll do one thing here, one thing there, like aaj 5 ghante mere office mein ruk jao, kal wahan pe ruk jana, this and that, because there is no sustainable model for the person to actually start her life afresh after leaving that abusive family context. So it's not just the whole family has, but also the alternative is not there.
Um, yeah, and that's why I want to move to the public morality question that I had posed and I'd given you in the indicator questions. I'm sort of and I want to pose this to Vivek first, that Amrita has spoken about how this morality of the family, actually it's a social morality that precludes and sort of covers everyone. It is from the family to the police person to the executive to the judiciary and to the state itself as the legislative. Um, how do you see the public morality from before 2018? Because it was very visual, and also we know that and I'm also locating public morality in the face of law, in the face of judges, and in the face of courtroom. Also, also legal professionals, people who are your peers and are representing the case, but suddenly there's this emotion which comes in. And uh, I am asking the question also because in the recent Madras High Court judgment, they just said that I am society, which is probably the first time any judges finally coming out of the shambles of those judicial unconscious, and we are different. And this is the question I spoke with, this is something I spoke to with Edwin Cameron also, that even in the Navtej Johar judgment, Prendu Malhotra said that the civilization should be apologetic, but she never said that we are part of the civilization, and she placed herself above a certain part of the population. So that is one question, that this idea of that the judiciary is always or above the public morality, but in lower courts mostly this is what is not seen. uh, so if you can speak about all of that.
Sure. So just there are 2 or 3 ways to approach this. So let me try. I agree that, I mean, one of the first, I remember I was in the courtroom and she said it, Indru Malhotra, because that was the portion of her judgment she read out. And I said, but she's not saying that civilization or whatever word she used is not what we want the apology from.
History she used.
History. I said, history doesn't have to apologize. You have to apologize. Society has to apologize, man, for all this nonsense. I mean, what is history has to apologize? So for me, all the press went all crazy and gaga about how she said all this fantastic stuff. Anyway, 2 or 3 ways to approach this. Again, I'll try and be brief. Let me try and gather a couple of thoughts. You talked about this family. You guys talked about marriage as an institution, etc. A colleague and me have been doing some interesting research on what are the legal hurdles that queer people face post decriminalization. And I think what Amrita and Jitender have done have made it very real, the actual tribulations that continue for queer people. But in terms of the law, what are these hurdles which the law can help try and solve? In at least the law in the books, the law as it is practiced on the streets or by the police, etc., is a different also a problem which I think you all have talked about. But in terms of law in the books, I do feel that the institution of marriage, to claim that institution, is not going to solve the problem of vast majority of queer people. I think we have to relook at how we structure our societies and how we want to, as a community, structure ourselves in terms of familial relationships and what family means, etc. So trying to claim this framework of marriage, which is heteronormative, and say we want it, is problematic. I have not followed these petitions particularly. I only read the headlines, so I know what vaguely is going on, and I can imagine what probably is being claimed. But I do believe that if the cases that have been filed today in the Delhi High Court would have gone through the kind of process that 377 went through, then it would have been a very different kind of claim that queer people are making to the judiciary today, not the claim of marriage. I think we would be claiming things which would be questioning much more public morality as we generally understand it today than we would be in terms of, the same old frameworks that have been foisted on us for millennia, such as marriage. So for me, I think it's a disappointing thing. I think we could have done it a little differently, and we still can. What I'm worried about now is if we do get a judgment which is affirmative for gay marriage, who does that leave out in terms of claiming similar rights outside the marriage framework? And I think that will be the vast majority. I think a lot of people that Amrita and Jitender and others that we know of we are talking about are those people who will be left out. In terms of, I can talk about, let me answer this also narrowly, because public morality is a very big term. So it's very difficult to kind of get your head around the whole thing. But I'll tell you in terms of judicial morality, for instance, there are interesting stories related to 377 there too. According to me, we got out and out homophobic judges in 2013. They were so perverse that they left their judgment to be issued the day before the senior judge retired. For 1.5 years, they didn't even issue their judgment. They quietly did it and then they ran away. But I think, and this is fortunately, unfortunately in law, luck plays a big role. It's a roll of the dice. Who you get to listen to your case, when you get them, what have they been exposed to, what have they not been exposed to. So all this prejudice that judges carry, which they should be leaving outside the courtroom and only dealing with the law, they do not deal with. And that's why, so we were always very clear, 377 as the legal arguments, our case is very strong. But if it comes into all these murky areas of personal prejudice and all, who knows how the judge will decide. I should say though that Justice A.P. Shah, when he passed the 2009 judgment, was already sensitive to these issues because, one of the things we had done over time in terms of the HIV issue was we had started sensitizing the judiciary on the concerns of people vulnerable to HIV and how the law is creating a problem in trying to deal with their concerns. So for instance, the criminalization of sex work is a real problem in terms of protecting sex workers from police violence and scattering HIV programs which happen within brothels and communities. So ITPA, the law against trafficking, is the law used against sex workers, and it's a really problematic law. Judges needed to be educated about these kind of laws. Judges need to be educated about discrimination law and how it plays out against HIV positive people, etc. One of the things that the judges needed to be also told was that 377 is a problem. But because that case was filed in 2001, we were doing these judicial trainings with judges all over the country, but we never mentioned this issue because it was, pending in courts, and it was not right for us to be influencing them in this manner. It is in the courtroom that will be decided. But the two people that we were able to get to do these workshops was the interesting story. One of them was Justice Michael Kirby, who is considered one of the greatest judges of Australia. He was a Supreme Court, what they call the High Court of Australia there, but it's their Supreme Court. Michael Kirby has been openly gay. He's now an 80-year-old man who's retired many years ago. He's been openly gay for decades. The other judge we were able to get was Justice Edwin Cameron, who just quit being the judge of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, one of the great courts of the world and one of the great judges of the world. Edwin Cameron is not only openly gay, but he's also openly HIV positive. They were the judges who were doing these workshops with judges across the country. And one of the things Edwin used to do before the workshop started was he used to shake every judge's hand when he was introduced to them, because he wanted to physically touch them, because he wanted them to realize when he told them that he was HIV positive, that they had touched someone who was HIV positive. And the sort of change that took place in that room was mind-blowing. They both revealed one of them revealed their HIV status and both of them revealed their gay status. And judges were finally meeting their peer group who were also gay, HIV positive in one case. And it totally changed the dynamic of how they saw everything. They understood HIV, they understood the problems people with HIV face, and to some extent sex workers, etc. So you saw actually in judgments that were issued then in some of these courts, very positive rulings. Justice A.P. Shah was one of those judges who happened to be sensitized in 1998 1999 when the first workshops were done, who happened to be listening to the case in 2008 as a Delhi High Court's Chief Justice. So that's where the luck played a role, and Justice Muralidhar already had a lot of queer friends and gay friends. So he knew the issues. Similarly, I would say there were judges in the Supreme Court hearing finally. Justice Chandrachud has spoken about this, that he has gay friends. Rohinton Nariman is someone who I've known before he was a judge. He's known about me and he knows about other gay people. So, that definitely helped, I'm sure. But unfortunately, it should not take these kinds of things to influence a court decision. It was their personal kind of inclination or whatever, their sympathies or whatever you call empathy, which allowed this to happen. But the judiciary is like that, unfortunately, more and more so. And I'm sorry to say this, but I do feel, and I don't practice law in the same way that Amrita does regularly in the courtroom for many years now. But from what I can tell and what I know, because I come also from a lawyer's family and I kind of am aware of what's going on and you read it in the papers, there's a decline in understanding of how the law should be applied in the courtroom. It is right across the board. It's not just the lower courts. To me, the real hard work is this work. The work that Amrita does and the work that we should be doing to take the 377 message and workshop it with all kinds of people, including policemen and the judiciary and all kinds of actors and players. That work I don't think is happening in the same way it should be happening, or if it's happening, it is certainly happening in quiet ways and we're not all aware of it. But it's the most vital work, and that's where morality will get affected over time, I think. But it's very hard work. It's resource intensive. Is there resources to do this kind of work? I'm not even sure anymore. But really, that's the work. And we have to think hard as a queer community about that. And that's why I think also the conversation has to be a larger conversation, not just you, me, and Amrita and Jitender sitting and saying, hey, let's do this. It has to be a concerted effort of really thinking through how we make change.
Almost we are just towards the end of this, and I would just turn back, and I'm not asking certain questions because I think that they've been covered. But one question that I wanted to ask is also like in People's Constitution, Rohit Day talks about how legal language and he talks about prostitution. You have spoken about Amrita legal language also, and you have spoken about how navigating the legal language is also you first said that it is also that the people and their interaction is becoming more and more. The law stays the same because the law language of the law stays the same, more or less, if that is what I'm interpreting. How do you see people navigating the legal language? Because it's already so, I think the problem starts with how heteronormative the language is. So it treats like it is subjected to a certain, the basic example could be sexual harassment, rape, where there are no, I mean, there's no inclusion of criminalization against LGBTQIA plus persons or queer community. So how do you see that as an aspect of legal language? And also like I would like to add is that why I say the legal language is highly placed is also that Rohit they says that he could not access the records of the Supreme Court because they were somewhere in the what do you call, the basement of Supreme Court, and there was a locker room where everything was kept. So it is sort of metaphorically also telling that how law is so distant to access. So if you could like weigh in on that and take like 2-3 minutes, I'm sorry, but
No, no, no. No, that's a very interesting question, and I'll just say that uh, whenever we are trying to make the clients understand, and they ask us that, okay, what is going to happen? Like, how are you going to say it in the court? Will we be asked questions? Will judge ask me something? Should I, like, should you brief me? Will my family be there? So, that's the thing, that even despite the fact that people have had, like, say, 1 or 2 hearings in a case, they are still, the process is so alienating and intimidating also, in terms of like the courtroom, the judge sitting at like a pedestal, the court staff milling around, and suddenly the judge comes and everybody has to get up. And so now in VC it's so different, because it's like you just switch on and switch off, and the mic and the mute and, like, the video. But otherwise the physical courtroom is very intimidating. And I'll give you one small example where this client of ours, who was a trans man, and he hadn't changed his documents. So to get him to enter the court, we had to make him a pass, for which he did not want to use his ID, which recorded his dead name. So then we said, but otherwise you will not get entry into the court if we need some ID for you, and that he had not undergone legal gender recognition, so his dead name was recorded, and he was visibly upset that he had to use his dead name to enter the court. So when you're talking about accessibility, this is like the basic example I could give, where where we are talking about access to, whether it's to the courts, to justice, so that's one example. And in terms of what one would also say now in 2021, and Vivek said, like, social media, it's a different terrain altogether. But I would say that what live law has done, what live for Twitter, live tweeting courtroom proceedings have done, is really now, like, sometimes I get live law reporting a case about a same-sex couple from my clients. I haven't seen it, but it gets forwarded immediately, because it gets, they kind of put it on Twitter, on Instagram, on like Facebook, and immediately people on WhatsApp group, somebody will put up this, they start forwarding, and I get these live law orders, or live law like stories from queer clients who are not, quote unquote, in our opinion, like so educated and all lawyerly and all, but because everybody is like, you get one order, then the next order everybody's following that. So now, like, you, like, as lawyers, that whole, I would say, the responsibility of kind of disseminating information, the the whole thing of like legal literacy, we have to rethink and revisit that model, because it is undergoing lots of changes. Like, literally, people on, and Jitender talked about these gaming groups, and there are so many other WhatsApp groups, especially where transgender persons are constantly discussing about who is doing legal gender check, like, konsa authority, konsa officer, they are giving information to each other, or about doctors, about medical information, which counselor to go to. So that the pool of information is now quite wide. Not to say that information is all good, and there is no, like, it does not have to be filtered, but I'm saying, in terms of the legal language, it has, in my opinion, also democratized. We talk about, like, in terms of how these legal websites like Live Law, Bar and Bench, and it has democratized the legalese that we call it, and now more and more people are following court proceedings. It's not just the lawyers and the judges now. It is like the reporters, the people who are interested in the issue, the community people. They are constantly, people ask us about the marriage case. People constantly ask us, okay, what is the update, what has happened in this hearing, and like, can you send me the order? And these people are supposedly, they're just like, kind of, they're interested in the issue, Of course, they also want that, that the court gives an affirmative order, but they're not parties, quote unquote. But they're very, very, so similarly, when a notification comes, the transgender rules came, so many people contacted me in terms of send me the rules, send me the thing. And I said, okay, no, I'll send you like the forms or whatever. And like, no, send me the rules. So it's like, so in terms of, when you talk about sexual harassment or, of course, there are huge gaps in terms of the legal imagination and the structure that are in place. So we, right now, as Vivek said, that just one step of decriminalization has taken 20 years. And like, we have we have a Supreme Court declaration on non-discrimination, but how it is implemented in vis-a-vis the private sector, we are seeing the discrimination is continuing. And because it's like, because people are still reluctant to go to court on every issue, because how much will you fight? You're fighting your family, you're trying to live a, like a decent life of dignity, you're trying to get a job. Like, will you just keep going to court on every issue? It's not possible. So it's also that who gets to go to court, as Vivek rightly said, it is where, all my other concerns are taken care of. If I get thrown out of a job because of my sexual orientation, I would have to find another job because I have a rent to pay. Instead of going to court and saying this is discrimination, very few people have that privilege of constantly like kind of agitating their claims.
Thank you for like that. And I think there were like a lot of questions that I wanted to ask. And I think when I spoke to Amrita and she said 1.5 hours is a lot. And I was telling you that this is not a lot. It's like,
sorry, I underestimate.
it's like really less. And so thank you for coming, and thank you for everyone who stayed. And I know that these questions, like not all of them we were able to like tackle with or like manage, but I think this is a start, and we have this conversation going about the transgenders, persons bill, like etc. All those questions. We're thinking to organize a session on that with transgender persons, like women and men. I think that is something that will be more authentic to address when there's some sort of a representation from there. And apart from that, thank you, Vivek. And I think you should all follow Center for Health Equity, Law and Policy, and the work Vivek is doing. And they are publishing these very like smart explainers on policy, like Disaster Management Act was one that I saw yesterday, and all of that. So you should see that because it's making accessible, because it's visually, and it's also in Hindi. And I think other languages, if I'm not sure, you can always tell that. And you should also follow Amrita. Probably she'll write a book because she has so much to say. And I think you should. And you should come to like our session when you do, and follow Jitender on all his socials, and follow Jitender on all their socials. And I'm sorry for like saying his, because like I know Jitender before their transition. So I'm sort of, yeah. And thank you for coming, and thank you for all the work that you do. And
thanks a lot. I just want to thank my fellow panelists for being color coordinated today.
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's like a shade of yellow going around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed it. But thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.